I'm so happy that there are people here in the audience. This is great. And I get to, been thinking about this talk, preparing it, I get to use my interest in cognitive psychology. You know, I consider it my weapon, the fact that I have both a computer science and cognitive psychology undergraduate degree, and I've exploited the knowledge that I've had from cognitive psychology throughout my whole technical career. And not in a way that exploiting doesn't mean good or bad, but it's like if you're aware, then at least that's a start. So let's get started. One of the things that I wanted to say is that having done quite a number of things in my life, and that I'm proud of, one of the things that's nice these days is to hearing about other people's experiences. So in this session, you will have time to get to share your experiences after we do a talk. So it's a bit of information, then you get to do some conversation with people around you. So don't be shy. If you're not up for that, you know, he's leaving, right? Okay. Okay. He's exploiting that opportunity to do that. And so, yeah, the other thing I wanted to say for anyone at this conference, that I am the director of the Agile Alliance's Agile Experience Report program. If anyone is applying Agile techniques, wants to write about their experience and eventually get a free ticket to the Agile conference for having written a paper, it's an opportunity. I've already recruited one person here, but I think there's a lot of interesting folks with great stories. So with that, let me get started. So what we're going to talk about is based on Daniel Kahneman's book, Fast and Slow, Thinking Fast and Slow. How many of you even heard of this or read? How many of you have read it? Okay, you've read some of it. It's not actually the best read unless you're like a psychology geek like I am, but we're going to talk about and introduce the concepts of fast and slow thinking, and then actually have some discussions about the tasks we do, the thinking that they require to be successful, and some of the things we can exploit, opportunities and practices, and some of the things that we have to be aware of, the drawbacks, what they're called cognitive illusions, and particularly around decision making and reframing your thoughts and how emotions get involved in things. So with that, what's your first reaction to this? Ugly. Okay. No, what else? Huh?
Funny.
Funny? Oh, funny. Okay. It's angry. Ooh.
I think it's a dog.
All right. So you have a reaction, right? Everyone, you may not want to share, but we want you to share. You cannot, if you're really looking at this animal, you cannot avoid having a reaction. All right. For me, when I first looked at this, because I was trying to find something that went, whoa, yeah, it's a dog. But I was kind of, it was sort of scary. It was almost like for me anyway, it was sort of a nightmare version of a dog, right? I don't know whether any of you had that or you thought he's funny, but he kind of looks weird, right? You have a visceral reaction to this if you really are looking at this guy. But one of the things about fast thinking, if you will, is that you have an automatic reaction. It's hard to stifle an emotional reaction to something. You just can't. And that's sort of an indicator of one of the characteristics of fast thinking. It's really using all the associations in the brain. And even if you know, oh, this is how it works, I'm not going to think this way. If something hits you, you'll have an emotional response, particularly if it's startling to you. So it's automatic, it's spontaneous, can cause us to feel emotions. It's associative. We see something, we react to this network of associations that we build up, and we have so many associations that we can, it just, it's locked in. You can't control your automatic association making. Right? You just can't. Now, if I tell you that, whoops, one of the things that fast thinking does is allow you to do some things very quickly, right? So if you hear a loud noise, which some of you did a couple of nights ago with the sirens, you know where it is. You find the direction of it. But if I tell you, because again, I want to get back to this picture of the dog here, that if I tell you that this is Peanut, okay, let's go back and look at Peanut. Peanut won the 2014 World's Ugliest Dog Contest. All right? So the United States has these strange contests like this. I don't know why. It was in the U.S.
I think they invented it.
But Peanut is a rescue dog, and his owner, Holly Chandler from Greenville, North Carolina, says that he's really a sweet little dog. He was abused as a puppy. He had his hair burned off, his head bashed in, right? Okay. So when I start telling you these things, now you might have a different emotional reaction to Peanut than you did with whatever your first, right? Because now you know more information, you've had time to process it. Okay. So that's very interesting, because I have a first reaction. It may not be the appropriate reaction. For me, he scared the crap out of me when I was doing internet search for how I can find something startling. I said, oh, the world's ugliest dog gets it for me, because then I learned his backstory, and I said, well, that's another example of once I have reasoning and I get to know things, and then I will again have an emotional response, because that's my fast brain making associations, and it generates, it's the source of emotions. So just one more thing before I jump into some of the characteristics of these, is that although Kahneman talks about fast thinking and slow thinking, and he talks fast thinking as system 1 and slow thinking as system 2, there really aren't parts of your brain that are fast thinking or slow thinking. There are many, they're just different mechanisms. They're simultaneously operating, and if you're a type 2 or system thinking, it has certain characteristics, and fast thinking has other ones. So just so that you're aware of that. It's good to wrap your heads around this conceptually of what fast thinking is about. So I said it was automatic and spontaneous. So one of the things, boom, if we hear a sound, we can locate it very quickly. We can recognize things in distance if we have visual acuity or not. In fact, things that are smaller rather than things that are larger. This diamond appears closer just because it's bigger. And we can do simple arithmetic in our head without using our slow thinking. Right? I said simple arithmetic. We can also do things, think about your tasks and your work. If you're driving on a road, particularly when you don't have to make a lot of decisions, you can just be in the zone driving. You're not doing any slow thinking to drive. I know that when I drive on a busy road that I'm familiar with, sometimes I forget to be alert and vigilant because I'm just in my fast thinking mode and, oh, crap, should have thought. You can actually, if you're very skilled at something like chess masters or whatever, the next move, they just know what to do because it's in their associative memory of how to find things. And they're not churning away with a computer algorithm to figure out what the next move is because they have these patterns. And so it's not just that you're reacting to things. It's really exploiting your associative memory. And if you build a great network of that, you can. If you're a chess master, you do it the next move without thinking, even though you may be associating the state of the board, and with 5 moves ahead or whatever. So it's actually interesting when you sort of have a illogical chessboard setup. Masters don't know what to do just as much as the rest of us because they're not using that associative memory. You can recognize, just picking out of the air, when people are talking, small, simple phrases in your native language without really doing any parsing of that. So it's like we even chunk common phrases in our brain that way. But now, what do you think when you see a sentence like this or a fragment like this? What is this? You obviously have a. Huh? So what is this? What is this? Probably some fragment from some job description, right? I don't know if you had self-motivated and can work independently, but also as a team player. I don't know. When I think of that, it's like, oh, that's kind of what you might describe as an agile employee. They want to be a team player, whatever. You can even pick up phrases that can characterize things. So it's not just that slow thinking or fast thinking does the simple reactive kind of stuff, but you form associations and you'll make a connection, whether it's an accurate one or not. On the other hand, slow thinking is something that requires effort. It's where we logic and reason about things. It requires us to stay focused. It's when it's distracted, it's hard to get back on task, right? And one of the things that it's also doing, you've heard of the executive function, it's also kind of monitoring what we're doing and our reactions and dampening them down at appropriate times. So it's self-critical. It's the part of the reasoning and brain part that has a lot of tasks to do. And in some sense, I'm going to talk about just surprisingly what takes System 2 thinking. This is a picture at actually an Agile conference. If you are talking to someone in a crowded room or in a bar, it requires System 2 thinking to focus in on what they're saying because of all this noise going on around you, right? And if you're trying to identify a sound that you're not familiar with or something, that requires System 2 thinking. It's like, oh, surprising sound or music fragment or something. It takes System 2 thinking to do that. I can give you an example of this. I was at a conference with Linda Rising, and we were hearing this noise, and it sounded like people, we were sitting talking. This is last November. And we were sitting in the conference in the hotel lobby talking, catching up, and there was this repeated loud noise. And I thought, oh, someone's coming up off the street. What's going on? Whatever. We didn't know what it was, but it was like kind of irritating. What was this noise? What was going on? There was a person obviously doing it. And then I remembered finally, oh, there's a Tourette's syndrome conference going on at the hotel at the same time. And that was a person with Tourette's actually talking. And it was like, whoa. And that was my System 2 thinking that put together the fact that, oh, I had noticed that sign a couple of days ago, at the conference. Anyway, it was like, that was a perfect example of that. And so sometimes, you may locate where the sound is, and then your System 2 thinking has to kick in to figure out where it is. And it was a whole set of reasonings that I hadn't realized. I says, oh, I know what that, I think I know what that is, because Lynn and I interrupted our conversation. So that was an example of that. So as if you're an exerciser or someone who is doing something at a normal pace, when you're pushing yourself at a tempo, it requires vigilance to keep up to that pace, whether you're working or running or whatever, right? So that requires System 2 thinking to kind of do something a little harder than you would normally want to do. It's tiring. It requires concentration. So your System 2 thinking is, gets tired. Well, parking in a small car space, right? Doing something and maneuvering in an area that requires a lot of, back up. You really have to have focus and concentration, unless you're a taxi driver or something. Maybe a smart car driver can really do that easily. They get skilled at it. Doing your taxes, even if you have TurboTax for the U.S. folks, it still requires, and these are in order of kind of complexity of System 2 thinking and how tiring you get. Following a logical argument is another one. If you're trying to, so I'm going to let you look at this, but I love this. Modal logic is special because it uses statements that are qualified. Expressions like necessarily, possibly, or sometimes. It solves some problems in a complex modal argument. many will naturally expand at least one claim beyond reason. When claims are irrationally expanded, many will accept an unreasonable conclusion. Therefore, numerous people are likely to accept the conclusion of a complex modal argument. Okay, convincing people is the largest obstacle to solving problems. Therefore, modal logic can solve all problems. Whoa, what's going on here? Okay, I love that. Thad Guy and XKCD are great sources of inspiration that give us. So if I'm following somebody's complex reasoning, which I'm sure some of you do on the job, all right, it requires system 2 thinking. But it's not that we're doing one and it's emotional and associative and the other that requires logic. It really isn't that simple. And I don't want you to walk away thinking that way. Our brain is like, it's a feedback system. Both kinds of thinking are going on at the same time. System 1 we can't control and it's going on automatically, right? So we're having emotional reactions, we're making associations. Somebody walked in the room, I'm going, oh yeah, I know you from yesterday lunch. I'm doing this stuff automatically. I'm recognizing you because I performed the association. And normally, system 2, your slow thinking runs in a comfortable low effort mode. Unless you have a job like some of you, by the way. And because if you're in a calm situation, it adopts suggestions from system 1 with little modification. So sometimes because system 2 is monitoring what's going on. It can say to system 1, oh, tone down that emotion, or don't feel that way, or, oh, watch out for you're doing this. Sometimes system 1 runs into difficulty because I can't form the associations, things aren't working right. And so it calls in system 2 for more detailed processing if I've got to do some thinking about it to figure something out. On the other hand, system 2 is monitoring what you're doing, as well as doing this logical thinking. And it kicks in when it detects something is about to not be the right thing that you want to do, and sort of adjusts and alters your behavior. So it kind of explains a couple of things, like when you're really tired or you've had a few drinks, your system 2 isn't, it gets tired or it gets compromised, then you become more emotional and intuitive and you let your guard down, all right? So not that you do that on the job or anything like that, but just be aware of that. So given that you have an understanding of these kind of practices, the way that your brain works, to have a conversation with at least one other person I trust that you can pair up. You may not know who they are, but let's talk about the things that you do and what kind of thinking they demand. You talk to someone next to you, at least one other person, and just have a discussion for 5 minutes. Don't be shy. Yeah. This noise around you, and hopefully you were having good conversations. And I was just letting the rise and fall of voices go around me because I couldn't, I'm not going to focus in. I'm not going to do system 2 thinking while you guys are having fun. But anyway, so what kinds of, who wants to share some of the things that they do and the kind of thinking they demand?
We have very similar areas in
Okay.
our jobs, and those areas included architectural thinking, which is a lot of system 2 thinking, but team building, which is more of a system 1 issue, cross-cultural.
Okay.
And then dealing with regulatory agencies, which is also, it's a mixture of system 1, system 2, but it brings in probably more system 1 than system 2.
Because you're reacting and you have things, you're making associations. Oh, here's how we could handle that, perhaps.
My thinking was it was more, they're dealing with, are you following the process that you defined? So it's more of a, how'd you call it?
Monitoring?
Well, it's more, you categorize that very well. How did you describe the process thinking for regulatory issues?
He doesn't remember. He was just speaking. Yeah. You were having a conversation. You're the memory. Yeah. Yeah.
You weren't expecting him to hang on to this stuff.
It was just coming out of his mouth. Yeah. Right. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The transition between the two, if you're a senior architect, for example, and you have to mentor a junior architect, things that are system one for you, because you made them that way over a long career.
Right.
And now you have to take them back, if you will, to system two, and explain it.
Which is hard work,
to
isn't it?
somebody, which is very hard, right? Some people basically can't do it.
It's well.
They can do the job excellently, but they can't explain the job to someone
Yeah.
else.
So I've got a couple that I think are interesting because they're kind of on the borderlines. One of them is I drive a manual transmission car, which is a fairly complex process. And sometimes I get to my gym in the morning and I don't remember anything between my driveway and my gym, which means that I've been in system one for 25 minutes in traffic, stop and go, shifting, all those things, right? So that's fully automatic.
Yeah.
And
With your manual. I
with
love
my
that.
manual transmission. So, and another one is if I brush my teeth with my right hand, I don't ever think about brushing my teeth. But if I brush my teeth with my left hand, it takes 2 minutes of concentration.
Which is maybe a good
It's
thing.
System two, it's a I can feel the difference between when I'm in automatic mode and when I'm in
Thinking mode.
thinking mode.
Hard thinking mode. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
An interesting one. We realized that we work in the buildings next to each other.
Okay.
So that just
Come here to me.
Yeah.
but just recognizing that geography of, oh yeah, that's the building next to mine was to me sort of system one kind of thing. But then she said, oh, we should get together and have lunch sometime. And to me that was
There
sort
was
of
a
shifting to
spontaneous-
system two.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
the actual mechanics of trying to figure out how to meet for lunch would be a system two kind of thing.
Right, but that was a spontaneous connection. Oh, we made the association. Yeah, yeah. This is fascinating because I often think that my work, it's not like when you're on autopilot, which I love the manual transmission being automatic. That's great. It's not that you're not doing system two thinking there, because you might be in the background doing some, like thinking about, oh, I don't know, your exercise routine or what you're going to do, or planning out, planning, I need to do these reps, let me see, but while you're driving and you're like, right, so you can be doing we do multitask at the same time, so our system two can be doing a lot of processing, and then we're doing some things automatically at the same time. It's not one or the other. Yeah.
I think that's sort of interesting because I've driven stick and I've tried to teach other people how to drive stick, and what sometimes happens when you're trying to teach someone something, you're almost trying to teach them in system two, but it means you sort of have to get out of your system one thinking to be able to explain it. Sort of like when you're trying to describe directions, how to get somewhere that you don't go all the time. You like completely ignore all the street signs and whatnot, and now you're trying to describe it in an explicit way. Well, turn at that, I don't know the name of the road. It's got a tree on it.
Exactly. So the associations you made in order to do a task, whether it's a technical, deeply complex task, they aren't actually really necessarily things that are good instructions for someone else. Because I know when I give directions, then that's a really, it's like to get to my house, you have to turn where the sidewalk ends and right before the red barn. It's like, okay. And and so I have different associations that I do when I'm going someplace that are not really good directions. Actually, I figured out the task how to get home, but explaining it to someone who's coming to my house is another different thing. So this is just a good priming. One of the things, if I think about from Agile Tasks, and there's a lot of I'm doing a bunch of things. If I'm a programmer or I'm a developer, hopefully some of these things should become automatic. There's nothing wrong with system one thinking where you're fast if it's in a comfortable context. It's great. You become expert at something. You don't have to think about what gear to shift into. It's just the other one, whatever that one was. So hopefully some of these tasks should become, running my test, how do I check and code? But when you're starting anything new, right, everything requires that to figure out. And the more you get it, we'll say splitting a story, that may always require system two thinking, where I'm, how do I make something smaller? But if I'm doing exploratory testing, I don't know how many of you have heard of exploratory testing, but that requires really, it's almost like improv. You are doing your system to logical thinking, but then you kind of release it, and then you form an association and you go with it. It's a really interesting blend, I think, of both of those operating in nice control. It's a weird thing. It's not just associative stuff. You're using your knowledge of what you had about the system, and you're doing this testing, kind of probing. It's a dance between the two. And so that one to me is a really good example where you're combining them, and you shift. You form an association, you go with it, but you keep on the stack this other stuff. So if you back out and do some other thing when you're testing, it's a very intense process to do. And I know the people who do the exploratory testing, they're exhilarated by it because it's a rush of the combination of the two. And when they're really good at it, they may be exhausted at the end of the day, but they're like, wow, I really did cool stuff. So it's not, so if I think about architectural tasks, and we might want to have a bit of a conversation about this, if I'm defining, looking at compliance, establishing standards, all this stuff. How much of it you think requires system 2 thinking, just from folks here that are? All of them?
Depends on your level. Depends on your skill level.
That's an interesting point. So say more about that from your.
Documents, for example, review documents, design, support, and configuration. If I am starting, especially I'm non-native speaker, I don't know how to write documents.
Okay.
So that's a challenge for me in the beginning. That once I start writing, once I make templates and stuff, then it becomes easier for me to just produce more and more documents.
Right.
Recommend tools, environments, and frameworks. It depends what I am dealing with. I am traditionally from J to E. So if you are talking about J to E stuff, I might say, oh, use this.
Without thinking.
Without much thinking.
Without
right?
deep thinking.
Deep thinking.
I didn't mean to without thinking. Without system. I correct myself. Without system 2 thinking.
System 2.
Much. Now, you may go along, and again, because they interplay with each other, you may have come out of your mouth, and then you said, oh, wait, your system 2 kind of is monitoring what your system 1 is doing. And you may have said, oh, I think that will be okay. And in the background, your monitor might say, oh, no, there may be an issue here, and you'll bring it up, right? So that's why people get annoyed when architects, because their system 2 is lagging around monitoring what their system 1 is saying. And then they come back and they may appear to contradict themselves or say, oh, but wait, but that's good because you're monitoring what your first impressions are. You can't, if you're an expert, you can't stop monitoring what you're doing. I mean, you do think, and so I wasn't meaning to say you're thinking, but it's going in this background mode of the critic of what your first skilled association was. You're still, if you're at all system 2 junkie, you will be always thinking about it. And I don't know if that's something that you experience or not, but I know it's like, oh, but wait, so it's almost like I sometimes wish that my first reaction I'd been able to go, and wait just a little longer. But when you're it's very hard to control that first impression. Yeah.
There are a couple of things sort of interesting where they sort of span it. One you're just talking about, I think, is conversations about architectural concerns, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you run into someone, you're talking to them about what the concern wasn't, but other times we think very deeply about we're going to plan the meeting, how are we going to facilitate it, how are we going to structure the conversation, and setting up and having the conversation is very much a system 2 thing, whereas the hallway conversation might only be a system 1, or like the resolving technical problems. You might be sitting there in some kind of deep system 2 kind of thinking mode, and your buddy comes over and says, "Oh, yeah, it's that," and then they walk away, and they immediately recognize the pattern, and that was their system 1 response to resolving the problem.
Yeah, you have.
There's an earlier slide you had that resume piece that talked about being an independent thinker, but being also a team player. If you put that in the context of 1 and 2, as an independent thinker, I might do any of these tasks, or a few of these tasks very quickly because I recognize the pattern. But now in a team setting, I have to explain my decisions. And that requires me to switch back to system 2.
Which is hard, yeah. You can know in your gut something, and then to explain it to someone is really the proof. Yeah, Joe, you had a comment.
Well, and one thing I guess I was thinking is always the good discussions going on with this is almost all of these, I go back and forth.
Yes.
Because I like the technical example because I have my first technical problem comes up, we were talking, you have your initial kind of reaction, which is kind of system 1, but then you might step back. Or it's too hard to, you don't have that initial. But even like gathering evidence, I know I went down recently and did analysis with John Brand. He was like, "Oh, you're getting pretty good at asking all these questions, doing other things." Well, there's a little bit of system 1 going on right at first, and then you step, and there's some system 2. So almost all those paths are really kind of
Oh, absolutely.
going back and forth.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that is actually probably one of the most important things to realize is that they're going on at both times. And so when you look at your behavior and you're like second guessing what your initial reaction is, well, yeah, that's good. You're an expert and your system 2 was chunking away while your system 1 came up with a reasonable question. Somebody else had yeah.
I like trade-offs because I think trade-offs, it's very easy to get carried away with system 1 and just find the sweet spot right away. And then later you spend hours justifying.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the point is that trade-offs are like, oh, we can do our knee-jerk reaction. We say, yeah. Sometimes knee-jerk reactions are okay. So the point I want to say, and this is a great discussion, and we will have more of this, is that you should know some facts about system 1 and 2, and don't get sad when I start talking through this. It just is the way our brains are. And because we have this system 1, a fast associative memory, it's been a wonderful advantage to us. It's really great. But it causes us to trip up in certain ways. Remember, it's emotional, it's highly associative, and I don't know how I came up with, I just know kind of things. And isn't it great that we don't have to think? Someone was saying, I read the book coming to this conference on a new book about habits, and they said, well, yeah, maybe it's estimated that 40% of what we do, we don't have to think about. It's just habit, something we do routinely. Whether it's good or bad, it's just a habit. So that's really great. I don't want to have to think about how I brush my teeth every day. You are such a great example. But maybe I do occasionally, right? Okay. So here's some facts about System 1 and System 2. In that, you've seen this illusion, right? And that's called the Mueller-Lyer illusion. If I look at the lines, not the arrow endpoints, even if I tell myself, and I know this, that they are both the same, the line part, not the arrow parts, they're exactly the same length. So does it look that way to you? Anybody? Does it look exactly the length? Take off the arrowheads. Do they look the same length? I can't make them look the same length, right? Even if I do things like shifting them. But it's interesting, I actually found on the diagonal that for me, they seem closer in length. I was just playing around with this. And then somebody told me once when I was giving this talk, oh yeah, that's because you have your receptors and we have horizontal, vertical, but the diagonal ones aren't quite wired in the same way. And I go, oh, I remember that I loved the perception class in cognitive psychology. And so this one is the one angle you might get closer to truth, right? But, to prove to you, I can take off the arrowheads and then, when I make them white, then they look the same. This is a mental, visual illusion that even if you know all the facts, you're going to be deceived, right? And so, so we have also, it's not this simple, we have a number of cognitive illusions, and I like the way that Kahneman talks about that, as opposed to cognitive biases, that are real, even if we know about them, and so we're going to talk about some of them, it's really hard to overcome them, right? So, and I'm not saying that, if you are hypervigilant using your System 2 brain, you can be aware of them once you know some of these things. and try to react. But it's really hard to be hyper-vigilant all the time because you'll be exhausted, you know. So just be aware that, and we're going to talk about some of these cognitive illusions. You just you cannot counteract them by saying, I know about it, therefore it won't happen. All right, so this one is a great acronym. It's what you see is all there is. Okay, WYSIATI. So if you use that, just being aware of that in your work and your practice and what you see and what you're talking to people. If you know, this is kind of a reaction that I've had is, so if someone gives you a report, right, and you're stressed to making a decision, oh, it came from an external advisor, so that is another bias, is outside authority tends to have more, I'm sorry, it's true, outside street cred than someone who's an insider giving a report. So if the one report gave this evidence to someone who's executive making a decision, that's all they saw, and they thought that's all there is because they were stressed, so I'll take an easy answer. They didn't realize how little information they had. And this happens a lot, I think, to us. In that.
Every parent knows that one.
Huh?
Every parent knows that one. Looking at you has great information for your kid.
So you make decisions based on what you see. And you then try to make yourself more confident by saying, well, that was all there was. I knew the best at the time. You're really not looking outside. So I can see this. I came from testing. My first job at Tektronix was an evaluation engineer, and I've seen this in the Agile practices where you have this, and I'm just using this silly little example of withdrawing cash, and you might have these scenarios. We could talk about quality attribute scenarios too, if we wanted to translate it to you guys. Okay, given that their account balance is less than 100, given these whatever, there's these scenarios, we're going to accept if it passes these tests, and I could go on and on, we accept it, right? Because this is all the tests are what we see is all there is, right? These are, and you need to really question if you want to counteract this. Well, is this really the complete coverage? Is that all there is? So the best way to counteract, well, we've done all these tests, life is good. Is that all there is? So you can, for WYSIATI, you can counteract with ITATI, if I can say. And if you ask, so how do you counteract it? If you're kind of like a 2-year-old, and is that? Okay. So if you become suspicious, you say, oh man, we got blinded by the fact we had X amount of tests or whatever. The next time you see that, because you won't avoid that, unless you're kind of someone like me, who's, I think, a perpetual 2-year-old, always asking questions, always asking, is that all there is? And mentally, when you're presented with evidence. Were you going to make a comment, Joe? Or
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
Something like that, I would expect that you'd lay out a matrix with different permutations of the
Oh,
chances.
yes, you
so
would.
that you can see where you're
I hope your matrix is all there is, because what if there's another dimension? No, yes.
So, just trying to consume scenarios in a linear fashion like this, it's hard to try and piece that together.
It absolutely is. So if you organize it in a matrix, and I think that's a great way of counteracting, is that all there is? I would ask, are all these, have I designed my matrix? And what am I missing? Even if you're really worried about that. Because we can say, oh, I created a structure. Now that's all there is. Okay.
Sure.
But I've done the same myself. I used it at Chemist Valley. But these days in the Agile community, they're coming up with, well, BDD specs are great. We can have them, but they're not a very good way to look at the completeness. So yeah, organizing is a very good idea.
Well, it depends on if you're just trying to get a user to click a button to change some data in a CRUD app, or if you're trying to keep things from.
Absolutely. So, so that's the case. So just be aware of, even if you're a very detailed, rigorous requirements person, always asking, is that all there is? Because I'm thinking of like another thing, is that some people are trained to think about all the error conditions and exceptions in the world, that can happen. But, and even though you're doing that, you develop patterns for what you know are error conditions in your head. So you may stop thinking about other ones because that associative stuff came easy and comfortably, and then you ignore some. you got to sort of kick yourself every once in a while. Particularly if you're dealing with things that people are going to die when they fall out of the sky. I mean, it's just kind of important to do that. Even if you're an expert, to occasionally ask, is that all there is? And if you get a little emotional, like, twinge that it might not be all there is, there's probably something there, yeah. So this one is so, advertisers know this one so well. If you're presenting the same information as differently, it's going to evoke different emotions, which emotions then drive your behavior, right? So if I look at, and this is 90% fat-free, this is a Cadbury bar, 90 fat-free. Well, if I were to relabel this 10% fat, right? right. Ooh, don't you have a different reaction, right? Okay, so you talk about mortality rates. If you're doing medical treatments, just think about it. You talk about a 90% survival rate within the first 3 months of doing some chemotherapy. I mean, I'm just, because I have friends undergoing some of this thing. If you then present that it's a 10% mortality rate, 10% die within the first, the persons do have different mental reactions. So oftentimes, if you think of something as loss, you get much more emotionally, I don't want to lose this. Or if you put something in the negative connotation, it is 10% fat, right? It's got to add up to 100%, right? But we will buy something that's fat-free 90% more than we will do 10% fat, right? It's just the way, okay. So framing things so that people get the positive emotional response rather than the negative emotional response will drive their behavior, right? So if someone couches any sort of technical thing as a loss rather than a gain, people go, oh. So anyway, they will have a more visceral reaction to it. Okay, so you've all, Dilbert is great, right? So the fact that our associative system 1 thinking is always there at working at the same time, we can't listen to new evidence, right? Whatever is said, if we're so in our comfort zone, we will interpret in our strong associative net. So, right, Dilbert's a jerk, right? Right? No matter what he said. I don't know if you've ever had this at work, something like that. It's like, oh, okay. Whatever I'm saying, they heard me say something else, right? So that one is kind of very hard to overcome in real time. By the way,
It's even hard to overcome.
Yes, it is. Because people form impressions, first impressions, which is really sad. So when you see a word like this, how would you think of what would you fill in this? Soup, eat soup. Okay. Actually, I had contrarians and they say soap. All right. Okay. So the notion about priming is a really powerful thing. And this is called priming. It doesn't happen just in words, it happens in people's actions, their behaviors. It turns out that if you were primed with eat, now you'll start thinking about what you had for breakfast, what's going to be for lunch, whether the forks were cold on the airplane. When I got a first class upgrade and I said, why is the silverware cold? That came to mind just right now. I had no idea I was going to say this because they were talking about eating, right? And it turns out that priming effects decay over time, like maybe 24 hours, but they last a long time. But if they get reinforced by things, they kind of have the little surge and keep up there. So yeah.
Isn't the anchoring problem in estimations an instance of this?
Oh yeah. So say more about it. Go right ahead.
So when we have an estimate or a negotiation, whatnot, whoever puts out the first number.
Oh boy, that primes everybody.
Primes the rest of the conversation, right? Which is why, like, if you're doing poker planning, people are showing all their things at the same time, so that they're not priming each other.
But I'll have to say, in theory, I don't know if you know about the Agile, estimation with poker planning. You're supposed to, what's your estimate, and you throw it over. I don't know if you play poker very often, but I used to play it every day at lunch, and I earned enough to buy lunch at work at Tech for like a year and a half. as soon as you start playing that regularly with the same people, you will know what their expectations, and you will be primed by what you see them do. So that's
the second round is primed by the first round, so to speak.
well, and again, particularly if you're the same people, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's unless you're playing poker and you kind of learn how to read that. So priming is something like you've done this. Everybody yawning, right? Everybody's yawning. One of the things about priming is that you can't control it. Again, that's a system one kind of reaction. I get on the airplane, someone's yawning, a nice little baby starts yawning. We all, okay.
After they eat soup, I thought the baby was hungry.
That's Dwayne, you're awesome. This is great. I love this. Okay, absolutely. No, it's sleepy. It's sleepy. But so you know, one of the things about priming, and psychologists have done interesting things about priming, is that, and Linda Rising tells me, be careful about this study. It's only one study, and they haven't really proved it. If people get up out of the chair more slowly, you will get up out of the chair more slowly. Because we're all just sitting here kind of tuned in as humans. And so someone walking more slowly, you'll walk more slowly. Now you may say, well, that's respectful or whatever. We kind of mimic as we're primed. And they've done studies that it's really amazing. We just do this stuff. We're so in tune with other humans around us that priming really makes us unconsciously adjust even our basic behavior. But let's talk about money, because that's actually interesting to know about. And I've experienced it with projects that I've worked on. You offer a reward to people for completing projects on time, and people will not collaborate as much together if you have individual rewards. Because if I have money as an effort, I'm going to, and they've done a lot of studies about this, even from like $1 to, the psychology sophomore taking tests, collaborating on a task with people. If they offer them a monetary reward for completing a task, you stop being a team player. Kind of scary. In that you don't want to depend on others because you want your dollar, right? And but there's some good effects, and that's what the managers think about, right? You persevere longer on difficult tasks because money is a carrot, but it causes you to be selfish and less willing to help others. It's like, okay, that's a mixed bag right there with that kind of priming. And they've done some very interesting studies, even at the very subtle level, with just like a nickel reward can cause people to do weird behavioral things. Okay, all right. So system 2 is not lazy. It gets tired, right? And you have to condition it and take care of it, and you have to feed and water it just like a long distance runner. Okay, it's very important to realize that it gets tired, and it needs some rest, and it needs recharging. When you're doing system 2 thinking, you can get in a flow state where you're really, really buzzing along on some deep analysis. Someone interrupts you. It really has been tired. It's really hard to get back to it. It's like, Okay, so one of the things that, and you made this comment, I'm first reading something, and I'll take your, is that if I become more skilled at a task, that there's less energy required. I still have to use my system 2 thinking, but it's less energy. Yeah.
That previous slide just reminded me that system 2 is an operation even when you're sleeping.
What?
System 2 is an operation even when you're sleeping.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Go ahead. So say more.
No, I was just going to say, there's a lot of times in the morning when I wake up, I'm filled with ideas. And I have to rush and write it all down before I forget it. So I have to remember.
Well, you won't actually forget them. You may actually, they'll be triggered by your associative memory sometime, maybe, if you're lucky.
You're not old enough.
I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I am old enough. I don't. Yeah. So anyway, so skill lessens the energy required. I don't know how many of you have ever thrown a pot. My brother got his BFA in pottery and sculpture and Italian. He got a bachelor's in Italian at the same time. He said, "Oh, pots, they're so easy to throw." Man, if you've ever tried throwing a pot, It's really hard. The more you do it, the better you get. But if they have, if you're doing activities that impose high demands, it wears this out. And so sometimes you're in this flow state, and then all of a sudden you crash. It's like, oh, can't do anything. I don't know if you've ever had that kind of. So you might be in a flow, you might be really exhilarating, and you will actually, because your brain is consuming sugar, you'll get, that's why people, and it's not a good thing, feeding themselves with caffeine or whatever, that it's not always a good thing to do that. One of the, how many of you have heard of the Pomodoro Technique? Just about the Agile people, right? It's interesting, yeah. Okay, so Pomodoro was a technique, and there's been a book about this, and it was actually it was invented by this guy, Francesco Cirillo, and then some of the other folks wrote about the Pomodoro effect and how to do this. Is if you want to give yourselves a break so you don't get tired out. And the idea is this is you identify the tasks that you're going to do, you focus on them for 25 minutes, and then you force yourself to just get up and walk away. Now your brain may be working in the background mode, but you're just trying to relax it so that you can then focus again on the task for the next. All right, and so some people, they have timers like this. So Francisco came to my house and spent a weekend, because he was working on a book that he was doing. And, a guy who invented Pomodoro, he wanted to try it out on me, right? So he planned out our conversations for the day and his goals, and he has this little Pomodoro worksheet. People who invent methods are really dogmatic about it. And what I found is like, and he would every 25 minutes, we were sitting in the armchair talking about design stuff or whatever. I wanted to keep talking because I got into flow. And he would want me to, stop, let's get up, go outside. And I was a jerk. It was my house after all. But anyway, the point is, there is some evidence that is the case of why university classes are 50 minutes long, because attention, focus. This one's far too long for me just to totally talk. Like an hour and a half is like ridiculous. But sometimes people, if they get, when you're doing system 2 thinking and you're really liking it and you get energized by it, some of us, system 2 thinking junkies, I like to call us, we get in a flow state, and it really does exist. We're having a great conversation. Our cycle may not be 25 minutes, right? You may need 50 or 40. So if you're dogmatic, but people who have trouble focusing because they are always interrupted, and if they impose this discipline of 25 minutes before I it helps them focus and say, okay, I know I'm going to get a break after 25 minutes. And so I know Agile teams, they have Pomodoro sessions where the programming, and it's, I think that it kind of depends on the work you're doing and whether this works for you or not. I don't know. Has anybody tried Pomodoro? Yeah.
I've used it for writing, and it seems to help.
For writing, that's an interesting. So that task, how is writing for you?
It's hard.
Yeah.
So I sit down.
So you're
and
forcing yourself for 25 minutes.
25 minutes. I read the technique before, so
Yeah.
the 5-minute break and another 25 minutes, and then I think you can take a longer break.
Right. So, but the point is, it was a task that was really hard for you.
Right.
And so you were, if I just do it for 25 minutes and not let myself get distracted, I'll get something done, right? So that's, that's an
What's
interesting.
interesting,
Yeah, go ahead.
what's interesting is when you have people on teams who are operating on different time scales. So, we get developers who get into the flow and they're so focused, and then in comes the business analyst hot from a meeting with users and shows up at their desk wanting their attention.
Right.
Boy, is that a clash
Disruptive.
of system 1 and system 2 thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I was just thinking about Barry Beaver's research on the importance of space and notion that when you're focused on a complex task, you're dropping down multiple levels and getting involved in more and more and more details.
Mhm.
But I think the last thing I would want is the timer going off. That's like the telephone ringing or the business analyst showing up.
But you have to know that it's a 20. You've signed up mentally to do that. I mean, don't make that work.
It's about eliminating those other distractions. You don't check email, text, you put down your phone. That's what the Pomodoro is
It's
about.
so I can focus
Nothing
totally.
besides this task. And really, after 25 minutes of nothing besides this task, you will often find yourself. I mean, a lot of people find themselves tired.
Depends on the
25
task.
minutes is a start point.
Yes.
And nobody ever adjusts it. But
I know.
you're supposed to find your own length of time.
You know what, though? I've had an argument with Francesco about that. I said, I think mine's longer than that. And he says, no, scientifically, it's like 35 minutes at max, And anyway, and I'm going,
Were you in the study?
no.
Well,
Yeah, right. He was like telling me that my brain was working differently because, anyway, he was quasi-dogmatic about it. And then as a Christmas present, he sent me a timer and a shirt and all that stuff. And have I used that? No, because that just doesn't work for me. Yeah, you're going to make...
I was just going to basically go here. I just can't stand the thought of
Can you speak up again?
I just can't stand the thought of being interrupted in deep thought when you're when you're trying to solve a problem or work out something, complex design and that. And, when the sheer thought of having to stop doing that is just insane. I can't.
It's driving you up the wall. It's like fingernail scratching. Yeah, go ahead.
I use a Pomodoro timer, it doesn't ring. So there's a timer and it counts down.
Okay.
If it doesn't ring after 25 minutes. So these are the first 25 minutes get me into the flow. I don't watch the timer anymore because I've committed myself to work for 25 minutes to a certain task.
So he's saying it's your starter. It's your starter focuser.
The timer, becomes irrelevant after 19 minutes or perhaps even after 20 minutes because I'm in the flow and it's 2:30 in the morning and I'm still...
Yeah. That's an interesting. It's a starter to get you going. I think that's great advice. So the point is, I think there's a difference in the task that you're doing. You're doing something that's difficult that you know that you have to just keep at it. In your case, you know you're going to keep at it, and you don't want to be interrupted. And once you get into it, you have to be so engaged to continue that you don't want to be interrupted. I think they're different kind of tasks probably that you're doing, but they're both involving system two thinking.
Well, the other aspect of this too, I'm kind of with Kim on this. I find interrupt-driven task management infuriating.
Me too.
So
yeah,
the
I
thing
just
think
presented it. It's great though.
Yeah, I mean,
it works for some people.
But the thing that I think really causes this not to work for me is the fact that it's artificially induced.
No, you're
It's
setting the
not
timer.
It's not a real event. It's arbitrary.
No, like a phone ringing or something actually happening in your environment.
So that's not artificial. You're not in control of that either.
That's true, but I can ignore that.
Well,
I'm not
you
making
can.
a commitment to pay attention to.
Oh, but he's not making a commitment to ignoring. I mean, the way you're using it is you're not making a commitment to when it counts down. It's not dinging at you. You're just letting it get you started. Yeah.
The first 25 minutes is commitment that I'm not getting disturbed, so I'm not checking email notes.
Right.
This is giving me...
Go ahead.
I am actually with him. I don't know this particular technique, but I have been fighting to combat my procrastination. One of the techniques they say is start with 10 minutes, and then
Oh, absolutely.
that gets me into that state, and sometimes I get into flow state quickly, and then I decide how long I get.
Right. Well, us people who exercise and try to done it as we've gotten older, it's like fake it until you make it. Just get out the door, get started. Then and particularly if you're going in a way where it's just as long to come back and whatever. Don't turn around, right? Go in a path that requires you to go in a loop or something. So when you're halfway out, it forces you to do things. So this is great discussion.
So one thing that
Yeah.
they tell you to do for, I'm struggling with some team issues. So one thing is that, if you know your Myers-Briggs, you can post your letters. So people who come up to talk to you can get an idea how they should talk to you because you're an INTF.
INTF, go away.
Exactly. So you're
We're all I's. Most of us are I's.
Never say go away.
Yeah.
My Pomodoro, so Harold on my team, his Pomodoro number is 15 hours. My Pomodoro number is about 3 minutes, and when we post these, we might have some
Better dynamics of the team. That's a very interesting thought. Okay, so when we're busy, we're a little more, so now everybody's been feeling their cognitive busyness, and don't interrupt me. We make selfless choices, and sometimes when we're asked to make a judgment, we just go, meh, and then go, because we really want to get back to our task. Okay, so that's, I want to switch a little bit. And this is not that we're lazy, but it's very easy to slip into unconsciously replacing hard questions to answer with simpler ones and think you're really answering the hard question. So I love this example. I found this on the website. Okay, as a beer and alcohol website, we're prohibited from advertising to minors. Please verify your age to enter. How old are you? Type something in, right? Are we really determining the age, or are we just substituting the answer to a simpler question? No, it's 21. There we are. Great. That is a classic example. I saw this on a real website. It was like, oh, isn't that awesome?
They all have to do that.
Yeah. Well, they do it in different ways, but is it really answering that hard question? Are they selling to? No. All right. Okay. So sometimes, like with interviewing, if someone interviews well, that doesn't mean that they're the right person for the job. When you really got to take a step back when you find yourself, oh, they interviewed well, is substituting for, I think they will work well on the job. And one way to deal with that issue is this candidate succeeding? You might say, well, the question we seem to be answering is whether she interviews well. Let's just not substitute. So you have to constantly catch yourself. Is interviewing well the criteria for job success? Because it's, and so some teams, I know with Agile teams, they actually have you, spend a day programming with them. And not that they're going to, oh, I'm the best programmer, but they want to see how you interact with the team, what you do when you don't know something, that kind of stuff. And I think, that is more effective than did they interview well, sort of. But you got to watch about that. Yeah.
A lot of people can interview well and not be able to code.
Yeah. And if that's the skill you want.
They know all of the right words to say, but they can't actually turn that into working software.
Yeah. Now, if they're nervous as hell, they may not do it well in a team setting, because you've got to make them feel comfortable, which is the setup for that. You can prime them for the wrong behaviors, but you got to let's do this. See how they think about it, reason, and give them the keyboard eventually. After a few minutes, not just have them do. As I remember, my interviews was like, do this programming assignment, and we have a time limit. That's not necessarily the best way to get people to do that. But if you're wanting to know that they can program well in a team environment, there are ways to do that.
Well, if you take the technology out of the equation, one of the things that I've done on interviews for developers, just to gauge their problem-solving skills out of context, is give them like the Mensa puzzles, like the whole thing where you have to weigh 9 stones, and you have a scale, and you have to do it in as few measurements as possible.
Yeah, well, I have real problems with that, actually.
We put people in our actual environment, and they do at least 1 hour of pair programming with somebody on code that will be shipped later that week.
So these, I interviewed at Microsoft when my husband got to work at Microsoft. And actually, Microsoft stopped doing those kind of Mensa-like questions because I got somebody, I did not get hired. I went all the way up to 7 p.m., but whatever. I'm glad I didn't get hired at Microsoft, actually. But the one guy asked this question about light bulbs and whatever, and I go, my first reaction was, this is stupid. This has nothing to do with my job. And so my reaction was, I'm a rebel anyway. I know I'm that kind of person. And I'm going, well, I could lick the light bulb or whatever. This is stupid. And I got angry. Maybe that's...
But it's how they answer the question, too. That's a relevant question.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
My understanding is
they don't do that now anymore.
I think Google stopped theirs as well because what they found was that it didn't seem to predict job performance.
At all. Yeah. They found yeah.
Your previous slide couples with your notion of is that all there is. Organizations say, well, if the software passes the acceptance test suite, it's ready to ship.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. And we're substituting a simpler question.
Yes.
It passed the test. That's a very, and it might be the best we can do. So it's sometimes if the context is right, a simpler question is what we have time to figure out. But you do have to be aware of that. That's an excellent point. So sometimes if you get into the flow of getting excited about it, is this really answering? Have we substituted an easier question? I think we've done this, but have people found some techniques for getting them back into the right frame of talking that you might want to share? Because I think that would be an interesting conversation about that. How you've been able to exploit that or counteract some of these cognitive illusions that you have. Has anyone come to mind when you're thinking about, well, how did I really do it well? Yeah.
So one thing you had a slide earlier before about how our behaviors change when we're cognitively busy. And I wonder if some of the thinking around reducing how much work in process people have sort of fits into that.
So the lean process.
You know, because if we've got like 10 things to do, even if we're just trying to do the one, those other 9 are still rumbling under our heads, and we'll be in different decision-making mode than if we've got 1 or 2 things on our plate. Will that get?
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, that might help you. Not worry, because if we're aware, so our background stress level of too much overload, because we are, our system too will be chunking away thinking about those other tasks while we're doing this one. You say, no, don't worry about tomorrow. What architect to not worry about tomorrow? Right? Yeah.
So, one example, my main job is to review architecture that people make for bids to send to the customers. And I interview the teams, and my last question is always, what did I forget to ask? And that's sort of and it proves to be very helpful in getting around the is that all there is thing, because after you have just asked if I've asked my questions, the ones that I could think of, you always get a good impression. You get the impression that their answers describe the whole architecture.
I think that's an excellent. Yeah. What did I ask?
And then, but they always have an answer. If I say, what did I forget to ask? They always have an answer, and it always is something that I wouldn't have thought of myself.
But you don't feel bad about that. You go, oh, great! I got you got information.
Yeah,
great.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you don't.
Yeah, Joe.
Here's one I recently found very useful. Is I was going down doing an agile assessment here, and we were talking to a lot of the business people, the technical people, and all that. And we had the standard question, which we'd get a lot of their fast thinking, but we would try to challenge them back to the little bit of the slow thinking, like, okay, what do you do? We're trying to get their big picture, and they're explaining all that. And then what works well, what doesn't work well, all those typical type of questions. And we're going through and dialoguing. But then we had one last question that we decided kind of at the last minute to start asking everybody, and it really kind of got a good reaction on everybody. We said, what can you do better to look at this, rather than, okay, this is wrong, it's easy to look at something else, or, if only the DBs that did this, or the business people would explain things better, or whatever,
what could I personally do?
Better.
Yeah.
If the team would respond, develop our business requirements better, but and it kind of stopped people, and sometimes they'd even, well, go ahead and think about it and get back with us on that. But it was not, it's like, well, now let's turn this back inside. Look, from your perspective, how can you add value to what's going on?
So, yeah.
You're powerless over these other things.
Right. What could you do?
Yes.
And that's interesting, which might definitely trigger some slow thinking. They might not have had any thought about that. So being willing to accept it later is probably a good thing. That's yeah.
Speaking about this in Agile terms, I'm not an Agilite. I like pieces of Agile. And I've come up with some ideas, and I got involved on LinkedIn. There's some Agile chat groups, and put the ideas out there. And some people went okay, and other people appeared to me to be phobic about any upfront analysis. And everything was going to emerge, and I would say, well, what about this? Don't worry about it, it'll emerge, whatever. And it seemed like first of all, I think that there's a natural human inclination to try to move as much as possible from 2 to 1.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah.
And I think that when you overdo that, then you don't question anymore. You don't explore the limits and the boundaries of what is possible.
Unless you're a curmudgeon who always does that no matter what context you're in.
Yes.
Some of us are wired
Some
differently.
of us are, but apparently there are a lot who are not. And so when you get the religion, you stop saying, what else is there? What are the limits of this? And you take it as, you're in the system one mindset, and everything is just, you take
Go
it.
with the flow. And there,
Yes, and I never figured out, I haven't to this moment figured out how to move that system one thinking, if it's possible, back to system two. And say, like, listen to yourself. You've said, have faith. I've asked you this question, I'd like a logical answer rather than you don't understand.
Right.
Have faith and confidence that everything will work out.
Yeah, okay.
And it's hard for me to believe that these very experienced people, if they heard themselves, would be okay with what they were doing, but I think they were in heavy system one.
So this is a topic that's probably outside the scope of what I wanted to finish, but I think it's an interesting thing in that if you're in but I'll say one comment. If you are in a familiar context, and they may think they are, that going with the flow of your associative memory skills is very effective. And if you're doing regular tasks that are routine, that you can learn from, and you become much more skilled and proficient. On the other hand, if there's irregularities in what's going on or unpredictability, it's hard for you to become skilled because this is a one-off or whatever. So a lot of the Agile practices of breaking down the work and getting feedback is trying to get it more, I think, into the associative. But it doesn't mean that, so that's just an observation about it. I don't think it's good or bad, but there are just some characteristics to be aware of. There are some practices that are there, and once you're familiar with the practice, maybe they work more effectively out, but they still have problems too.
I also wonder if some of this is a quality of the discourse in online conversations like this, right?
Oh, online conversation quality. What?
They don't see you, they don't hear your tone.
Right. Well, no, but that, just back to the system one, system two thinking, in these kinds of contexts, it's all system one responses to what we see posted.
Right.
And we're often not sort of taking a step back to have the system two responses, and when that does happen, it gets drowned out by all the other system one responses to what people have posted.
Yeah. So I want to get through a couple of, and I think this is great, because about the decision making, because I claimed that that's one of the most important things. There's a lot of shortcomings in our decision making just because of the way we're wired. We become overconfident when we're at ease. So when we feel comfortable about whatever, we're at ease, we get overconfident. People just do. We also, and as you know that when you're talking about risk analysis, people overestimate the likelihood of something that's really rare. They're all worried about, X, whatever, when that really isn't a problem, health-wise or whatever. If we just vaccinate rather than worry about Ebola coming into, whatever. We overreact to losses, so we're loss adverse, and we have problems where we frame the real problem too narrowly, which I think is one of your concerns with Agile processes, that they don't see the bigger stuff coming up. And sometimes it's good to trust your intuitions if there's the right context for that, but sometimes we inappropriately trust our intuitions as well. So just talking about cognitive ease, where we feel comfortable, and it's kind of a back and forth kind of thing. If something's repeated, if we have visual of a clear understanding of it, a primed idea, so someone walking in confidently, you're talking about meetings, or we're in a good mood, we're going to feel more at ease. So if we're grumpy, we're not going to be that way. And if we're in this state of cognitive ease, then what we see seems familiar, it feels right, it feels good. We get these feelings of, it feels effortless, right? So the point is, you got a team and this is my experience, when it's working together and they know each other. I was just shepherding a paper with this guy who was joined a mob programming group, and he was explaining it. In his paper he wrote, it's like wolf pack singing. And I said, it's amazing. Okay, he says wolf pack singing is the wolves do not duplicate the frequency, they all pick one. So if it's a pack, no two will sing at exactly the same frequency. So they're so at ease that they're tuning and adjusting. He says, oh, that's the best experience, team experience in my life. And I go, well, man, that's ease. That is ease. The guy is at ease. And so when you're at ease, things are effortless. It's great. You feel good. But the problem is that when you're not at ease, you're hypervigilant and you're distrustful, and so that system 2 is kicking in, and sometimes the wrong things get you into the ease state. You know, you got primed by somebody, and you need to be a little vigilant, right? So you can't control you can actually control others' ease when you're trying to affect a meeting. Not to say this is a bad thing, but Linda Rising and Mary Lynn Manns, when in their patterns of their fearless change patterns, talk about one of the way to get people at ease if you're trying to introduce new ideas is to do food, right? To give people eat. If you're eating over food, you get at ease, then they're more receptive to your new idea. Whatever you're saying feels true. So they, you know, and this is not bad marketing, but you just need to be aware of ease can help whatever your message is feel good, and people will be more receptive to it. But it can be manipulative. So I don't want to, you know, I'm not trying to say it but you just have to be aware of this. Because your decision making and your feelings about what you're deciding are affected by your level of cognitive ease. And we also are bad at judging probability. We do it, we're just not good. We use representation, you know, like I'm going to say negative stereotyping or profiling, instead of actually based on probability. But sometimes our intuition, which is I would call profiling, can be better than guesses. Guesses aren't good, but it may not be probability. You know, most people who act friendly are, right? I just watched the Blazers lose the game last night. I'm from Portland. A tall athlete is more likely to play basketball than football. These days at Oregon, it's not true. They have really tall, but it's more likely. You know, this is a fact from when I become a little old lady driving aggressively, watch out. But so young men are more likely to drive aggressively than little old women like me, and actually people who with PhDs are more likely to subscribe to the New York Times than those who only completed high school. All right, and these are based on intuitions probably. But so here's a test case of how we use representativeness or stereotyping to make a judgment about somebody. So here you see this woman using her e-reader on the subway reading the New York Times. And what's more likely, do you think she has a PhD or she does not have a college degree? What's your
PhD.
You think she has a PhD?
Because of her glasses.
Okay. Okay, what else? Yeah, and it's an e-reader, right? It's not just the paper, whatever. That might be your first, profiling. You might do that, right? And this is actually interesting because when you look at probability, 1.68% of the people in New York or in the have PhDs. 80% have high school degrees. 5 million people use the transportation system daily, of which those are 80% are high school only. I mean, seriously. And if you see someone, no matter what they look like, if you were based on probability, probability would be that she's more likely to not have a PhD. PhD is pretty, but we will say, oh, this person's smart, right, great. The other thing we do is we project what is the, anyway, so here's a question, all right, for you. Get an answer in your mind. So Julie is a senior at a university She read fluently when she was 4. What's her GPA? Okay, just get in mind. State University, yeah, maybe if I should have said at MIT, right? What's your grade point average? Whatever. You get an idea in your head, right? Pretty high, I would say, right? You would think, oh yes.
As long as she's only taking reading classes.
Oh, see, you're going to. So how do you come up with an answer? You look for a causal link between evidence and a prediction. And remember, we're bad at making predictions based on probabilities. And we say, well, is she relative to the norm? No, she was higher when she was 4, so I'm going to project that onto my perception of her. Well, she's a precocious reader, so therefore I'm going to match that level of exceptionalness to her current situation because, reading is associated with going to university. If you never read, right, you might. So you kind of make this slippery slope go in with her and do that, yeah.
Actually, I think even just the existence of the 4 in the sentence probably anchors the estimate as well. Yeah. Even though it's in a unit, I think actually.
I probably did, yeah. Okay, so.
Is it 4 out of 5 or 4 out of 10?
U.S. Yeah.
4 is the most.
So it's really hard to prove correlation and causation. I love this one, yeah. Okay, so yeah, I used to think correlation implied causation. Then I took a statistics class, now I don't. It sounds like the class helped. Well, maybe okay. Even if we know this crap, we don't do very well at this. So if you have a prediction about something that's kind of a rare bird or event, this is kind of a workflow that you might want to do. Do you have useful evidence? If no, just choose the baseline number, 1 point, what the percentage of high school versus, and you'll probably be more right than wrong. If you have some useful evidence, then ask yourself, how confident are you in it? Because you may have all this background or whatever. If you're not confident, even if you have evidence, then readjust based on how confident you feel, right? If you are confident, then stick with your prediction. And so it's how confident you are in your evidence should recalibrate. Now, this is a thoughtful process, by the way. This is a system 2 kind of thinking about decisions, right, in your predictions. But some of you in your work may have to do this kind of stuff. This is a useful, when I do assessments and things, this is something I now have in my head that I really, really want to think about what kind of evidence I have and my confidence in it, when they're talking about what I recommend or whatever. Yeah.
If architects use this when deciding to apply new technology, then we would have a lot less problems in that.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you anchoring us here?
No.
I'm not understanding why useful evidence, gather evidence. Why?
It's you're trying to make a decision. You have evidence. You have some or not. You have to make a decision. This is at that point.
At this moment in time?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. That's all I'm saying. So it's good to trust your intuition, because you don't have to do all this, recalibration of stuff. When you have a regular environment, so it's not a rare event, and you have lots of time to learn and practice, your intuition will get better and better. And you have a set of stable regularities that are coming at you. So if you're doing new technology, you may not, your intuition may be totally wrong, is the point. And so you can't really trust your intuition when there's no stable regularities to learn from. So if you keep having one-off situations, it's really hard to learn the patterns so that you can't get better. You learn what to look for, as I hear Joe saying, well, I learned what to ask for, but I'm still, now I will not trust my gut. I can't do that. And again, we're talking about when I'm making decisions. If you cast something as a loss as opposed to a gain, people, if they perceive it as a loss, will not, and you're making a recommendation or we're coming to a decision, they will freak out and suffer pain and will not decide rationally. Unless they're, as I was talking to Jack Greenfield last night, his wife is a day trader by trade. She's been doing this for a number of years. She has to, even after all these years, ignore her gut and follow the algorithms to make predictions. And she still feels pain from loss even after all this time. So it doesn't go away because we're wired this way. And I heard that story and I went, you got to just ignore your gut sometimes, yeah. And that's really great. So I want to end, because I know we're kind of at the end of the time, by giving two different things as techniques. I call this pre-retrospectives. The authors of this technique call it pre-mortems, and I don't like that in the Agile community. Yeah, it's like before the death, whatever. But they talk about if you're having a decision where loss and gain, and people are all freaked out and unhappy, and there's the website reference to that, performing a project pre-mortem. And so that blog was, I found it very interesting. And you have to have a knowledgeable group when you're making a decision. And if you just let people go free form first about imagining a year from now that we implemented what we're recommending in our plan, we made that big decision, and it sucked so bad, the company went bankrupt or whatever. So now everybody's going to go, right? And then you ask them to write privately, so they're not being biased by other people. I was thinking about that as they're doing it. To write the history of the past year, why we failed. How did we get there? Here's what happened. So they wrote this failure scenario, and embellish it. Give them time to get it out. You share the stories around to overcome, and it really breaks them out of their fear mode, and then they start becoming more creative at what could we do to counteract this failure. And people then get, oh yeah, okay, we exposed our worst fears. How likely, and it's actually a very effective technique. And when I was talking about this at a conference, I had a woman who said, who was worked for a bank in Vancouver, BC. She was going to go back and take this to her group right away, right, and try it right away, because they had big decisions coming up, with financial risk in the deployment of various applications that they were doing. And I need to ping her now and say, well, how did it go? But the other thing that you can do is to think consciously of reframing the way you're thinking in the decision, using what you now know about System 1 and System 2 thinking. So if I have a situation, here's a recipe very quickly, that I want to revisit, rethink, step back and ask a question about what happened. It may be too late, it may be after the fact. Consider the frame that you were using when you were feeling that way. And think about your unspoken assumptions and belief, and restate what you believe, what you know, what happened because of the System 1 and 2 thinking. Do a decomposition analysis, a post, I won't use the word post-mortem, but at least restate in the terms of fast and slow thinking. And that can be very revealing when you then come to well, what should we do next, or how should we behave differently? So reframing a wildly optimistic prediction. Why did we make that low of an estimate? Right, okay, we sucked big time in our retrospective. We didn't hit anything. Well, okay, we have a can-do attitude. We also read a positive review of that new framework or your favorite authority's blog. Microservices, Martin Fowler thinks they're cool, whatever. Right? Whatever, Sam Newman was here. He's all excited about it. All right, we want to believe we can do this more quickly using that. Everyone wants to go faster. So, well, we're probably too optimistic. Let's consider our lack of experience and revisit our estimates. So these are some things to do. But you may do that after you've done a decision, or you've had your first reaction. You go, wait a minute, let's as a group think about this. So the reframing is something that it's the oh-ho, and then I go back and think about why did I feel that way. So with the interesting in getting out of time, I don't want to say that it's fast versus slow. It's fast and slow. They're working at the same time. You can exploit the both types of thinking. But you need to counteract those fast thinking quirks. You need to support your System 2 thinking, nourish it. You need to not cut it off if it's 25 minutes doesn't work for you. It doesn't work for me either. You need to go with the flow, but you realize it does get tired, and that certain priming of things can really, cause you to just react without even thinking. So be aware of that. You want to strengthen and support the necessary slow thinking you have to do, and get better at the fast thinking, I think, on the things that you want to do repetitively. But if you remember what you see is all there is and counteract that, that's the other thing you need to do too. It's not fast versus slow, it's how do I exploit. So with that, I'm done. So thank you.